Everyone, and welcome back to Reviews with Tyberius D. Today, I have been requested to review the 40k universe. Now, there's a lot to cover in here, and let me suffice it to say that I am not going to be talking about all the 40k universe or even most of the details. And so, this is largely a video for 40k fans and giving my initial thoughts. This will be some level of introduction in case you have no idea what 40k is, and that is actually Warhammer 40,000. But in a general sense here is that you may be lost, and I apologize if you are, but this is actually my first step into it, and unfortunately, this is just a huge universe that has so much overlapping stuff going on with it that I just cannot possibly crack the ice open without literally opening an iceberg. So, roll the intro, and then we'll get into this, and if you're willing to stick with me on this one, here's your introduction to 40k. I really do like me that intro. I can't lie. All right, cool. So 40K. What is 40K? So I only have a few notes here. I've been trying to script it, but I've largely just got the notes in my head. What is 40K? Okay. I want to compare it to a couple other universes and kind of give you what the theme of it is. And I want to start with that, and I want to build out upon that into a general view. The entire point of Star Trek is a humanist worldview of what the future might be. So it's built on humanist principles. Humanity is awesome. Humanity is great. And that as we go about the universe, we get to explore ourselves and we figure out what humanity is and what potentials actually therein lie, and what is basically the maximum possible human potential. And so Star Trek is the hopium version of the future. Okay? We're going to move to Star Wars. And I'm talking about these as a pillar, as a guidepost. Star Wars is kind of almost after that. The Golden Age has largely disappeared to where the humanity has kind of realized what its place in the universe is, and it got used to that, but the balance of power has changed. Humanity is important. Humanity is an integral role of how the universe works, but humanity isn't really that much more special than any other species or race. They may have more political or economic power or what have you, but in the Star Wars universe is that humanity is just another cog in the machine. We've realized our potential. We realized what our pros and our cons are related to other species and races, and we've largely integrated ourselves into the galactic community, where we're just another part of the community or a cog in the machine. And we figured out how we were going to interact with all that. And so this is kind of, if you will, in a nutshell, humanity, or this future for humanity is very even in that it's not like horrible, it's not great, it's kind of neutral. Then we get to 40K. 40K is the grim, dark universe. They literally talk about that. That's kind of their motif, their mindset. And to understand what that means is that, in a general sense, this is the future of mankind that is 1 minute to midnight on the doomsday clock. And if you don't understand what that means, largely it comes down to this. There is so many existential threats that are opposing humanity that any of them that are not radically opposed and put down are an existential threat that could end human life and existence from forever. This is the 41st millennium in a nutshell. This is 40K. And even in their own history, like, humanity went through this process. They went through the Star Trek phase where humanity was freaking awesome. They literally had black hole generator weapons. They went through an era where they were just kind of part of the galactic community to some degree, which largely that era was everything went to shit. And everyone had to reset to ground zero. And then you get to the 41st millennium where humanity's on the back foot. And to some degree, this excuse me. God damn, I can't talk. To some degree, at a glance, this doesn't make a lot of sense because humanity is the Imperium of Man and has 1 million worlds that it controls. It controls most of the known galaxy. But the problem is that basically what we're down to is a select core of about 7 or so races that are still left, to a large degree, large astro-political entities that engage and operate. And they're the meanest, toughest sons of bitches left. And so, just to give you an outline of where we're at here, you have the Imperium Man, controls most of the known galaxy, right? strong, incredibly powerful, but it's disunified because it's absolutely massive, and it's had an absolute lacking of leadership since the Emperor of Man didn't die, but he basically got turned into a delinquent, or he has no real power or authority because he's basically dead. And I know that sounds a little weird, but we'll have to do that on another episode. But anyway, general sense, Imperium Man, absolutely huge, massive, and still puts up a hell of a fight, but it has to marshal its resources, and it's really poor at doing that. And so you'll see literally entire worlds of humanity wiped out, and some times the Imperium won't notice for years until they finally put their act together, and at that point it's way too late. Okay, cool. So that's the Imperium. That's where humanity's at. The next group I'll just throw out here is the Tyranids. And the Tyranids are one of the most interesting sci-fi, if you will, creatures that I've ever seen. So what are the Tyranids in a nutshell? They are bugs to a large degree, but they're not quite bugs that you would think of. They devour any and all life in the universe, and they have entirely different forms and subspecies, and they literally are like they're bioweapons in a nutshell, is that they will go from planet to planet to planet, taking in the genetic code of everything that they take into them, and they can literally build out the units that they need, whether they be low-end units or high-end units or like leaders. They will build them by custom to formally oppose whatever they're going up against. And so if you're talking about a cold world, the Tyranids will land on that cold world, and the first wave will largely die off because of attrition, because they will freeze to death. But they can realize the environmental stimuli and what they're dealing with, and they can program with all the genetic information that they have within their genome. They can customize which genomes they activate, and they can turn new bugs out that have massive layers of insulation and fat on them, so that they can operate in this kind of environment. And they are basically the most adaptive life form that has ever existed in any kind of sci-fi that I've ever seen. They are weird because they have a hive mind, kind of like the Borg. But we're not 100% sure exactly how all of that works. And so in a general nutshell, at least to expand upon this and tell you like what's going on here, is that for me personally, the Tyranids are an existential threat because they can literally come in, drop onto a human planet, eat everything on the planet, turn it part of basically the Tyranid collective, and they can snowball effect to where they can take over the entire galaxy. And it takes a massive, massive response from the Imperium Man to hold that off. But of course, Tyranids aren't the only thing. Let's talk about chaos. Okay, chaos is really weird. For anyone who does not know what it is. And basically what it is two things. One is that it is another dimension entirely. And that is, there are creatures that are powered by an energy that is sufficient in another dimension that can bleed out into ours. And basically how this works, in a nutshell, is that all the emotions and all the things that you feel don't just stay in this universe. They leak into another universe. And once there's enough of those emotions, they can culminate into beings. That those emotions that you feel every day culminate into another reality that forms, that once there's enough of them, they hit critical mass and they form into new entities. And we call these demons, unironically enough. And eventually you get into demonic gods and demon princes on this. We're not going to explain all that. But in a nutshell, chaos is the energy of our world, whether it's the love and the hate and the malice or the compassion. All of these energies from humanity and other races culminate together into a race of emotionally driven beings that wish to influence our reality so that they can get more powerful and feed on our emotions, whether it's love or hate or anguish or any of that stuff. And basically, there is one point called the Eye of Terror in the Warhammer 40 Fantasy or Warhammer universe where there is an open rift that they can all spill out of, and all kinds of nasty shit comes out of this thing. And largely, whenever they come out in mass, it's called a Black Crusade, and this is an Armageddon level event every time it happens. Is that basically it's a life or death fight for the survival of the universe, because if they were to lose, basically chaos would come and dominate the entire galaxy, and that is not only the end of humanity but the end of everybody. And so you have the Tyranids and you have Chaos. The other side of Chaos is that those energies don't always just perpetrate out of the Eye of Terror or out of a tear in the void that can sometimes form during a warp storm. What you have is that it can influence people and slowly manifest through people in this reciprocal relationship where if I become incredibly emotional, is that I can feed the warp, and then if you are particularly susceptible to the warp, it can feed back into you and through you, and Chaos can corrupt you as like literally a spiritual energy that floods into you from the other dimension. And so you will have the followers of Chaos that can be on all these other worlds that will influence what's going on and can become infiltrators and traitors within the Imperium or any of these other races, so that they will affect change for the powers of Chaos themselves. And so, in a nutshell, you have 3 major powers in the galaxy, and we're not even close to done yet. Some of them are more major than others. Let's get into the more minor. You have the Orcs. The Orcs are really weird. They're basically dumber than a box of rocks, but the more of them you get together, the more intelligent they become. And they have this really weird effect that's actually powered a little bit by the Chaos powers. What we see is that their emotions and their aptitudes are reflected within their numbers. The more numbers that they have, the more powerful that they become and the more intelligent they become. And so the more orcs, the bigger they go, and they breed. They literally breed by fungus. They are basically a fungal infection on a planet, and they will literally grow as like a plant would, to the point where you get goblins and orcs and snotlings and all these other people. And I'm blending a little bit of fantasy into this, and I apologize, but largely you get orcs, which are literally grown, and they will eventually build out, and sooner or later, once they hit a critical mass, they'll literally just suddenly discover how to use technology, and they'll know how to build guns, and they'll know how to build cars, and they'll know how to build all this stuff. And literally, they are so weirdly powerful that by no functional rules of physics, most of their technology should never work. You jump into an orc plane for a human, it will never work for them. But if an orc is in it, it'll suddenly start flying and doing all these things that should not be physically possible to do. And so the orcs, while they're not nearly as powerful as the Imperium Man, because they're isolated into small pockets because they just haven't been formally wiped out yet, is that when they hit critical mass and they go on a WOG, which is basically their version of a crusade, they are so incredibly powerful that they can just systematically come in and wipe out planets in the billions. And they have these really weird powers to where they can basically manipulate the fabric of reality so that certain things work for them that should never work. But largely because they are now so isolated, they can't formally come together in any kind of power that can formally end the Imperium and be a doomsday level event. WOGs are serious issues, don't get me wrong, they can wipe out entire sectors in a matter of years. But in a general sense here is that the Imperium, usually when it can marshal its forces, can beat back the WOGs and turn the tide. Next is I'm going to save them for last. Next is the Necrons. These are maybe an Armageddon level event. There's a big conversation on that. The Necrons are basically Terminators, more or less, but they're super Terminators. They're not nearly as weak. They're biomechanical organisms that largely are robotic. They don't really have minds of their own, except for more of a kind of a Borg-like hive mind as well. Largely, they have leaders that do have personality, and they have a bunch of drones that really don't have personality, and they just order everybody else around. But they used to be a race called the Necrons here, and they used to be very organic, but they transfer themselves into these biomechanical bodies largely to propagate their lives in perpetuity. And come to find out that wasn't the case, or at least it wasn't worth it, because most of them lost their own personalities and their own souls. So, where are we at? Basically, what the Necrons are is that they are a super powerful ancient civilization that has incredible weapons from a war of a bygone age. And so, while they may not have the numbers or the astropolitical influence at the moment, a lot of them are in hibernation, that are coming out of hibernation. And when they come up, even though they may be in very limited numbers, they can absolutely beat the ever-living shit out of whoever they engage. And they can basically 1v10 anybody in engagement. They're nasty, and they're incredibly powerful. And the only reason why there may not be an Armageddon level event is that they're probably, even if you woke all the Necrons up all at one time, because some of them are only now just coming out of hibernation after like millions of years, there may not be enough of them to really put a massive dent into the better part. And there's a big debate on how many there actually is. I'm not going to answer that. I'm just saying I don't know. Next race is very akin to this. Is the Eldar and the Dark Eldar. Functionally, give me a drink here for a second. Functionally is a by functionality is that the Eldar are basically on their last leg. They are kind of an ancient race. They actually were one of the ones that fought the Necrons way back when, but they've lost a lot of their prestige and a lot of their presence and a lot of their affluence. I'm not going to get in that particular backstory, but basically they built a chaos god in a nutshell. So you can get the sense that they really fucked up. Anyway, what I am getting into, and what I do want to explain, is that the Eldar are incredibly powerful and incredibly competent, and they can literally 1v5 most humans. The problem is that there's so very few little of them left that they have the same kind of problem that the Necrons have, but we absolutely know that they cannot fight the Imperium Man in a knockdown, drag-out fight. The problem for the Imperium Man, and regarding the Eldar, is that, and even the Dark Eldar, is that, one, they're incredibly elusive and sneaky. The Eldar don't have planets they live on. Either they're Eldar and they have craft worlds, which are giant floating ships that they go at sublight speeds, but you would literally have to launch a crusade against a particular ship randomly. So you have to find it, not get shot up, identify where it is, tell everybody else where it is, and organize a crusade, which usually takes 10 years in order to find where this thing is, and then send a crusade at it to kill it. It's basically a floating continent ship is what a craft world is. And to a large degree, it's just the Imperium is not willing to spend the enormous amount of manpower and ammunition to destroy these, because they're aloft, they don't really land on planets except for a very few, and so they're not particularly worried about the Eldar, and the Eldar just can't bring together enough astropolitical influence to oppose the Imperium or almost anybody else. They're very much boom and zoomers, hit and run attackers, and that's whether they're the Eldar or the Dark Eldar. The Dark Eldar are a little bit different in the regards that they don't hide on craft worlds, they literally hide within the warp. And what they did is they have some really advanced technology where they've made like their own little pocket dimensions within the warp so that they're safe, but everybody else would die horribly to the Chaos Gods or to the Chaos entities. And so they're literally hiding in the midst of their own enemies, but no one's the wiser. So, without further ado, that largely wraps up the Eldar. And the only people largely left, as far as I can remember, are the Tau. And the Tau are largely insignificant. They are relatively a new race that has come up. And they look very much humanoid, but they're blue-skinned and they kind of look a little funky. They're aliens, right? They are basically space communists. And the problem with the Tau is not that they don't present any kind of threat. They're pretty competent in combat, but they only have about 50 worlds to them. They're just isolated. They're not very powerful, astropolitically speaking, and even the Eldar could take them down. So in a general sense here, they're kind of like the up-and-coming race, but you would never want to be their friends because they're basically space communists. So without further ado, that's kind of an overview. And if I forgot another race, I apologize, but I think I've wrapped everybody up into a nice little shell. So why is this important? I talked about it's the Grimdark universe. It's 1 minute to midnight. All of these threats, or at least all these threats in perpetuity, are an existential threat to the human existence writ large. And anytime that one of these starts firing up, they've got battles on multiple fronts. So you've got an Orc Wog over here, and a Tau attack over here, and a Dark Eldar raid over here, and the humanity is basically on the defense 24/7. Now they could go on the offense, but about 10,000 years ago, that's what they were doing, and they had a civil war that fundamentally broke the Imperium, and they've been coasting ever since. Every now and again, they'll take back territory, and every now and again, they lose territory, but most of what they are largely geared out is to opposing the Tyranids and opposing the Chaos. And outside of that, everything else is a secondary concern. And so every resource they have is, basically built out around Cadia to oppose everything coming out of the Eye of Terror, or it's built out into responding to a Tyranid invasion, which even the Imperium is having issues being equipped and ready to deal with. Okay, we're coming in 20 minutes. So I could add a little bit more to this, but what I'm going to finish off with is, in a general overview, is that what is the point of this universe? Why would you care about it? It's basically sci-fi horror personified. Now, you can have that in like the Borg or what have you, in Star Wars or Star Trek or what have you, but this is the ultimate horror universe. It's got a lot of action, it's got a lot of cool stuff, there's a lot of fans regarding this series, but in a general nutshell, what this series and this universe is that this is the universe in where humanity is on the back foot and everything's going to hell. And it's interesting because you kind of examine what humanity can be while capable, while also having their back against the wall. And that's why I find this universe very interesting, is that it's got a lot of backstory and a lot of universe world building into what happens when humanity's had its golden age. It's moved past it, and now our back's against the wall. We're having to fend off all of these threats, and we have to deal with all of these threats in a substantive way. And you kind of really rapidly conclude that there's no good guys in this universe. You can root for humanity. You can be, hashtag humanity first. But a lot of humanity is not people that you would want to engage with. There's a lot of problems with this. And so in a nutshell, what I'm just trying to align for you, in a general prerogative, is that the reason why you want to watch 40K or that you want to be engaged is that if you don't want the Hopian version of the universe, you want to see humanity on the back feet, watch this. So one other thing I wanted to add, I was going to get into it earlier and I totally forgot, I spaced, was that Star Trek probably dominates television as far as like the biggest sci-fi, is that Star Trek just dominates most of television and most miniseries and that kind of thing. We know Star Wars probably dominates when it comes to movies. 40K probably dominates alternate media, particularly even more than Doctor Who does. Is that if you're talking about books and games and what have you, 40K probably has a bigger sci-fi influence in those genres than anything else. And so this is one of the big sci-fi trifectas that most people don't even know about. It was launched out of Britain. It has percolated across the world, particularly within the Commonwealth, but even in the United States has picked up on this in the last 20 years. But it's growing more and more fans, but a lot of people are in this weird state because the 40K has transformed a significant amount in the last 20 years. When it started, it was more of a meme. It's kind of a joke. It was largely just grimdark universe, and it was a lot of the storylines were really ridiculous and overplopped and kind of silly. But what they've largely done in the last 20 years, in particular, is that they've readdressed it. And they made it the grimdark universe. In the 41st millennium, there is always war. There's always chaos. There's always everything's about to go to hell. And they've made it a lot more serious. They've ground out the storylines into something that's a lot more, not believable, but a lot more, I don't know how to put this. It's a lot more human, unironically, is that it explains things in a way that people can identify and realize. And so whether we're talking about the Horus Heresy or we're talking about just, the siege of the Vrax, for example, right? You have all these things that are going on that fundamentally question the human condition as far as what we're going to do when all these things happen. And so without further ado, this is going to be my introduction to 40K and 40K reviews. I love this theme, and it's absolutely a great methodology for exploring literary and story concepts. But if you're looking for a universe of hope and joy and what humanity can be, this isn't really the universe for you. But if you want to see what happens when humanity's on the back foot, which I've said now for the third time, might be the universe for you. And it's got a lot of cool stuff in it. You've got Space Marines and power armor that puts Starship Troopers to shame. You've got basically super this, super that. If 40K invaded any other universe, 40K would absolutely stomp. They'd stomp Dune, they'd stomp Mass Effect, they would stomp on Star Wars, they'd stomp on Star Trek. This is humanity turned up to 11, where we're past the golden age, and now everything is, they're rivaling us and stronger than us, or is a significant threat. And I'm going to end that with that because I'm having trouble thinking. I didn't really get a script that I wanted to hit, and I'm also losing my voice pretty rapidly, so I'm going to have to take a break. But anyway, check out the next video that will be up the day after this one drops. So whether you're watching it the day of or maybe months later, don't know. If you're watching this video, the day after will be is the Imperium or the Imperium and Man Fascist from 40K. And that is a geopolitical special episode. Definitely check that one out. If you are a 40K fan, you might enjoy that. And without further ado, the stream is not ending, but I'm closing out this particular portion. Enjoy yourselves. I hope you enjoy my content and my channel, and we'll catch you next time. Have a good one.